This episode is brought to you by podiatrygrowth.com/podpatrol.
Hi, I'm Jim McDonald. I'm a podiatrist and the owner of Podiatry Growth, where I help my colleagues get found by the patients who need them most. How many people in your community are searching for a foot doctor right now and landing somewhere other than your practice? Most of us have no idea, not because we aren't good at what we do, but because we've never actually looked. That's the whole point of the Practice Visibility Scan. It maps where your practice shows up on Google across your entire area, so you can see exactly where patients can find you and where they can't. It's complimentary to all of my podiatry colleagues, and it's the first step with everyone I work with. Start your Practice Visibility Scan today at podiatrygrowth.com/podpatrol.
Every step matters. Pod Patrol. Pod Patrol. Pod Patrol. Every step matters. Feet hit the ground, we rise, we climb. Ain't stopping now, it's our time to shine. Turn it up loud. Pod Patrol. Pod Patrol. Pod Patrol. Pod Patrol. Every step matters.
All right, welcome back to Paw Patrol with your host, Dr. Jeff Dykes. Tonight, I'm joined by Dr. Douglas Pacaccio. Thank you for joining me.
Jeff, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Doing fantastic. It's good to see you again. We are reconnecting after spending a little time in Chicago. I wore my Cubs shirt. I don't know if you're a Cubs fan or not, but I wore my Cubs shirt in honor of Chicago. Are you Cubs or White Sox?
I'm actually a White Sox fan, but
Okay.
there's a caveat. My wife is a Cubs fan, and I'm a North Sider. I grew up on the North Side, so I don't hate the Cubs. You know, the whole idea that you have to hate one team to like the other. I kind of reject that because I tell my Cub friends who hate the Sox and my Sox fan friends who hate the Cubs that you really want that other team to win when they're not playing each other, because ideally a great World Series would be Cubs, Sox, Chicago. And if you're a Cubs fan, you know, Cubs winning Game 7 for the ultimate, and if you're a Sox fan, the Sox winning Game 7 for ultimate. So I'm praying and hoping for that. So I actually root for the Cubs when they're not playing the White Sox. Yeah, just like I'm a Sox fan, but I do root for the Cubs when they're not playing the Sox. That's fair enough, right?
So tell anyone who doesn't know who you are, where you practice, where you did residency, school, residency, the whole spiel, and tell people how you got to where you are.
Sure. So we were talking about Cubs, Sox. I grew up on the north side of Chicago, north suburbs. I went to the University of Illinois for undergrad. I went to Scholl for podiatry school. Then I went to I know of a Georgetown program back in the early 2000s when it was a singular program before MedStar, and I know it was split up. I then left there and did about 16 months in St. Louis, and then got recruited back to Illinois. And I now practice. I actually have my own practice for about 16, 17 years.
Wow.
And then recently sold private practice and joined the largest orthopedic, doctor-owned, doctor-driven orthopedic group in Illinois called Ortho Illinois. I practice out of Rockford, Illinois now.
Okay. It's quite the journey. We got lots to discuss there because I think having practice in multiple models, what was your model in St. Louis?
Model in St. Louis was multi-doctor podiatry group.
Okay.
They at the time I did my program out east. I'm kind of an older guy, and so some of the big 3-year programs were not as plentiful as they are now. And so I was brought in to kind of do the rear foot, hind foot work for this multi-doctor group that was about 3 different offices in the St. Louis area. Enjoyed that. I had major trouble with the allergies in St. Louis. I'm really allergic. Sorry, I dropped some. I'm really allergic to mold, and you're down in that like river bottom. And so I ran my air conditioning from pretty much like February to like November. And so that prompted sort of a recruitment to move back to the state of Illinois, where I then got recruited by another hospital. We were brought into a private practice there was kind of this thing where they were doing where the government was saying, if you go recruit someone who does limb salvage or something, we will support their starting salary. And there was a 2-year commitment. There was a guarantee. Mm-hmm. So a smaller practice brought us in. My wife and I did that for 2 years. and then we went out on our own. We had a good run with that. I'm sure, Jeff, as you know, you probably talked to people who are in private practice in various parts of the country. It's gotten really hard in
Yeah.
some ways to have your own practice. It's not impossible, but it certainly was something that was wearing down on my life. And I got to a point where I thought, you know what, I've kind of done 2/3 of my career this way. Now I can sell the practice and go just work for someone else. And that's when I had gotten approached by the orthopedic group a couple times, and I kind of had it pretty good. I liked where I was at, and then the last time they approached me, I was ready, and so here we are. I work for a big orthopedic group in Illinois, and it's a different model. I mean, if you wanted to get into the nuts and bolts of it, there's definitely different weeds on both sides of that fence, good and bad.
Yeah, I think that's the crux of it. Is everyone I've talked to, there's kind of pros and cons of no matter what model you're in, there's pros and cons, whether it be autonomy on one side or revenue or RVUs, so you don't have to worry about patients having insurance or not if you're a hospital employee. There's all the pros and cons that come with each of those models. But yeah, there has been a trend, a downtrend of private practices, or at least especially sole private practices. They seem to be grouping up together or selling to private equity to consolidate resources, and office managers that manage multiple practices. Again, pros and cons of each of those models. So are you happy with your current model? I guess that's a tough question. We might have to mute this out if you're not happy, and so your employer doesn't find out.
I am happy, but like I think, like you heard before from other people, there's trade-offs to everything. When you go from, you kind of have to go into it with proper expectations. Like anything about when you prep someone for surgery, you're trying to temper their expectations and be transparent about what reasonable sounds like. And I did a lot of diligence on it. It's pretty funny because like the people at Ortho Illinois, most of the orthopedic doctors there, and even the podiatrists that I work with, they've never known anything other than being like an employed physician of a big organization where you have we have a person who does that for us. When I had my own practice, I did the credentialing. I shopped the malpractice insurance. I got the umbrella insurance for the office. I did the contract negotiations with my office space. I bought the buildings. I did all that stuff, right? You go into one of these groups, you don't deal with any of that stuff. And there's something peaceful about that. It is funny though, because the thing about, and what a lot of people think, and this is something I will say about it, a lot of my friends like, well, you go in there and they have professional coders and you don't have to worry about any of that stuff. And they think like I'm some sort of a savant in my clinic because they're like, what's that procedure? I'd be like, oh, that's a subtalar fusion. It's 28725 with a Gastrox, 2276887, 26785, stuff like that. And like, oh my God, these like CPT codes, and how do you know all these numbers and these ICD-10s and these CPTs? And my answer to them is, there's nothing special about me other than the fact that I've worked for myself for 20 years, and you have to know that stuff to make the business run. The misnomer, I think, Jeff, is that people think that just because you have a professional coder on the other end of wherever you're sending your op report, that it's being done correctly.
Yeah.
And I tell everybody, and this isn't to throw anybody under the bus. I think any professional coder will tell you. I've been to coding courses when I had private practice, where 3 professional coders were up on stage and they all had a big disagreement argument about how you were supposed to code any one procedure, any type of an op report. So it's not black and white. And I think it's designed that way for a reason, right? I think one of the best things I ever heard at a coding course was the insurance companies, they know what they want you to say in terms of the vernacular and wording they want you to use to meet their criteria for whether it, meets the threshold for that code, but they're never going to tell you. So it's very much of a they want you to miss the mark so they can deny it for a stupid reason. So then that delays payment, and that's part of the game. So just being in this bigger practice, I think just assuming that that's all taken care of, I recommend to anybody, whether they're in a hospital employment situation or in a large group, to go to coding courses and learn about the CPT codes to describe the types of procedures that we're doing.
I have heard some issues with people who outsource their coding, especially if you use a company that is paid based on collections, and they are incentivized to upcode. But at the end of the day, you are still responsible for the correct coding. And you might think, well, how could I be responsible if they're the ones doing the coding? And the insurance company doesn't care. If your name is on the submission, you are responsible for correct coding. So not saying there's any deviant behavior out there, but you got to be a little bit careful and pay attention to who's doing your coding and how it's being done. So just don't assume everything is fine on the back end. Just periodically kind of run some audits and check and make sure, and you might find something like that's not how I would have billed that, and have those discussions. But the other interesting part about private practice is that you almost have to have a degree in business too. You go to all this school to be a doctor, but you don't know how to understand financial reports and salaries and payroll and accounting and all the stuff, paying your rent and the electricity and the internet's out. Now what? Who's in charge? Well, I guess that's me. I'm the one who has to go figure that out today, but I'm still trying to see patients. So there could be some additional things that come along with that private practice. Again, maybe one of the negatives. Pros, you have the autonomy. You're in charge. You're the boss. You get to say all those things that you're in charge of. But interesting to think about, because there's a lot of things that go into these things that I think younger people don't fully understand.
Yeah, that's 100% correct. And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head when you said you should really, wherever you're at, you should be putting periodic audits. Back in the old day when 20 years ago, 15 years, it was a lot easier. The scrutiny on denials, the games that are played by the insurance companies were a lot less. I did have to fire a coding company one time because they were like coding codes that were for like, urology and all kinds of things. Like, it's like, I don't think they were purposely trying to say that we did the catheter on an ankle fusion,
Yeah.
but they didn't know what they didn't know. And so you
Sure.
just can't assume. And if you're not looking, things can bite you. So if you are the business owner, you do have to know that. There are definitely things that I wish I was told when I first started out. You'll learn a lot of it just by trial and error. You learn a lot of it by trial and error.
So you are a fellowship director. Tell people who may not be aware what your fellowship is all about. Give people a little rundown on what that's about.
Sure. So I am in. We're starting August. Let's think. It's going to be. I want to say my 13th or 14th year of training a 1-year fellow. So I have one slot for a fellow. The idea came to me 14 years ago. A guy in a local residency came in and said, "Hey, I'd like to do some training with you, or do you have any room looking for a job?" And I was at a point in my private practice. I said, I could probably use some help. So why don't I bring this guy in and I can kind of pay him as an associate and train him at the same time and kind of get him where I want him. And so we did that, and then that started the program. And then I teamed up with another guy who owns another private practice, and we started the Northwest Illinois Foot and Ankle Fellowship Foundation. So we are a 1-year postgraduate that specializes in total ankle replacement, Charcot reconstruction, complex deformity correction. The other side of the group, they do a lot of forefoot sports med, a lot of like amputation, hospital work. All good things to know, right? And so it's a pretty well-rounded program. I will say it's a hard program, and I do get from most of my fellows that it was a really hard year, but they really appreciate what they learned through it, that they come away feeling like the juice was worth the squeeze, that all the work they put in, they gained enough knowledge and skill set to get out there and be better than they otherwise would have been. So we do that. We have one fellow every year, and that's all it is. And half of the time you'll be with me up at Ortho Illinois, and the other half of the time you'll be with the other group.
So let's give people a little bit of behind the scenes on what it's like to be a fellowship director, because a lot of people listening, I have a lot of younger listeners, students, residents, new attendings who may be interested in a fellowship, and they want to know what it's like from your side. How does that process work? Once they've hit submit, let's say they go to the whatever and they submit all their application to say, hey, yeah, I'm interested. Then what does that look like on your side?
So from my perspective, and I'm a little bit old school, so I think at the risk of getting in a little bit of trouble, but I'm okay with it. I think that when someone wants to come to my fellowship, really what I'm looking for first and foremost is someone who doesn't want just a piece of paper hanging on the wall, someone who wants to improve their knowledge. Now, the complexity of the things that I do on a regular basis, it's the better trained they are in residency in terms of the basics, the better they'll do. But what I've learned is that if someone comes with a good attitude, a hard work ethic, and I think you work with students, right, Jeff? You work with
Yep.
students, so
I do.
you know what I'm talking about, and you can probably elaborate this maybe more eloquently than I'm about to, which is the person that shows up with the attitude of like, "Hey, teach me. I'm here. Yeah, I'm 15 minutes late. The line at Starbucks was long today, and now I'm here. But hey, I'm present. So click the box. Trophy won. That person's not going to get much out of my fellowship. But the person who is reading ahead and wanting to gain from those procedures, they're just going to get so much more out of it, because I can walk you through, if there's a surgery you don't do, Jeff, that I do, or if there's a surgery you do that I don't do, in terms of like what are the steps of the procedures. I mean, we've both been doing surgery for a long time. We both know how to handle a scalpel, but I could show up to your OR just like, all right, Jeff, show me how to do this procedure. Well, how much do you think I'm going to really absorb if you're just like, okay, step 1, step 2, this is how I do it, versus if I go into the procedure, understanding the tenets of what we're trying to do, and maybe even be able to preempt what your next move is. It makes that hard knowledge a lot more quickly. And I have a really interesting saying for my fellows, which is good assistants make good surgeons. And that was something that I was taught in residency. And I was also known, if you called my old residency director, I was known as the guy who was just always in the hospital for the whole time I was there. I was very well aware in residency that I only had this much time to learn my skill set, for which I take very seriously. That's going to be my career going from there on out. It wasn't cut corners. It wasn't do the bare minimum to get your piece of paper and then go out and try to collect a paycheck. It was, people allow us to put them to sleep where they have zero control over their body. They allow us to apply sharp objects to their body, saws, scalpels, put instruments in there and implants, and they have zero control over what happens. And I always, when I get in a room where I feel like that's not being taken seriously, I'm very quick to remind that entire room and say, hey, have you guys ever stopped to think about what you're doing here? So if you're one of those people in residency who's constantly saying, I am not here to check a box in my journey to become an attending doctor, I'm here to learn the foundation of what's going to help me be an attending doctor, then that's where my fellowship would be a good hit the click button, right? If all you want is a piece of paper to say you're fellowship trained, skip my program, because I want the person that wants to learn. I want the person that wants to get better.
Yeah, and I think that, has been proven out before. You get out of something what you put into it. And if you have your heart in it, you're going to get a lot more out of it than just showing up. And I think that's, for the most part, people who want to go above and beyond and do an extra year of fellowship, they have maybe that little extra drive. I don't know. That's not fair. I didn't do a fellowship, so I can say whatever I want because I'm not a fellowship person, but sometimes they already have that built in, like, hey, I want to go the extra mile, I want to do this, or unfortunately sometimes people maybe didn't get the residency training that they had hoped for, or they didn't get the exposure to certain procedures, and they just they need a little bit of extra. But there are a lot of people out there who strive for fellowships who want that extra. They're the extra go-getters. How many people do you usually get? How do you narrow down? You get an applicant pool, and then how do you start whittling it down from your side?
Well, let's see. In high years, we've had as many as 28 to 30 people interview.
Wow.
One of the things that my fellowship maybe does a poor job of is we have kind of resisted that whole let's interview earlier and earlier and earlier in the year to secure a fellow.
Yeah.
So there's good and bad to that, in my opinion, because what I find is sometimes I've had really good candidates who've come out and visited, and our interviews were a little bit later, and they said, hey, Dr. Pacaccio, I really wanted to do your program, but I took this program as offered to me, and it's good enough, and I knew there was some uncertainty with waiting for you, and I totally appreciate it. I understand that, but when I get someone who holds out and waits, and they're also a good candidate, that says quite a bit about them. So we do get we are on the ACFAS website. People will reach out to us. They'll come and visit. Like I was telling you offline, I had a guy come in today from New Jersey, and I just had one of those days in clinic where like, and this should make anybody listening to this who practices feel good. Like everybody was unhappy. Like I was dealing with non-unions. I was dealing with, nerve entrapment. I was dealing, not always mine, but like,
Right.
just like that whole thing when you have that day where just everybody's miserable and no one's really blaming you, but you just feel like everybody's blaming you. And then you have this audience behind you. And I got my new fellow that's coming in, my old fellow that's going out, and I got this prospective fellow that's sitting there. And I have this massive peanut gallery audience for this, like these days that you don't like in clinic. And I turn to them and I go, listen, they're not all these days, every day is not like this, right? I've had days where a resident has come and they've seen how chaotic it can be at Ortho Illinois with what we do. And I had one guy, I looked at him, I said, hey man, if this isn't for you, you can leave. You can leave anytime. And I really didn't mean that. If he's out there and listening, I really didn't mean that as like, hey, I don't want you. It's like a test, right? And literally he ate lunch and he left. He just didn't. I said, what? They said, oh, he said he's good. He's done. He's not. This isn't for him. And so in a way, I kind of feel bad about it. But at the same time, like, even if I was at a program, and this is advice for these people that are maybe watching who you're talking to about what happens after you click the send button on the app, even if you aren't going to pick that program or you feel like it's not for you, finish the day, right? I mean, everybody wants to know that you finish the day. And I think that says a lot about someone's character. Like even just showing up and knowing that, this isn't for me, but I committed my day to this. I'm going to finish that, because all that does is that when you go somewhere else and that other director calls me and says, hey, this guy went to your place. How did you think about him? Well, one thing I can't say about him is, the guy gave up and left early. That's the kind of things. And you work with students. I'm sure you see types of things all the time.
Yes, there's a wide swath of social behavior, some of them good, some of them absolutely bizarre. And you don't think that people are capable of such bizarre social behavior, but they are. You just have to meet enough people, no matter what they are. Medical students, I don't care. Grocery store, meet enough people. You're going to find socially, what's that? Patients. Exactly. You're going to get socially bizarre behavior every now and then. So I can relate to what you're saying about those crazy days in clinic. My residency director, Dr. Burns, would always get to the end of the day and he'd say, I don't know if we helped anyone today. I don't know if we helped anyone, because it's just like, I talk about it with my wife too. It's like, where are all the happy people? Like, oh, they're off. They're living their life. They're good. They don't swing by to be like, hey doc, my ankle feels fantastic. Thank you. You fixed it 3 years ago. I've been riding horses. I've been going for runs. Feels great. Thanks. It's like all the people that are still in that process, whether they just broke something or whether it's still hurting down the road, those are the people that keep coming back. And it can be very frustrating. So especially if you're in a high volume practice, like I'm sure you are, and as soon as you ratchet up the complexity of these patients, whether it be comorbidities, whatever it may be, Charcot, recon, diabetic, all these people, then you're banging your head against the wall at some point saying like, all right, enough's enough.
You feel inadequate sometimes. And it's funny because like after a day like today, I might go on the internet, my group gives us feedback in terms of what our online reviews are. The thing about being in private practice, I never cared about that. I didn't seek it. I didn't care. People could be calling me an axe murderer online. I had no idea. I knew people were filling the seats. And I thought, well, that's probably good enough. But they do get, and I'm like, so now I'll see my reviews and I'm like, are they talking about the same person? Because after a day like today, there's no way that this is what people are saying. One thing that was cathartic for me, and I don't know if this happened to you, was when I actually started collating my cases for boards to get board certified. It was a pain in the butt because there was a lot of paperwork to kind of load everything into the system. I don't really know how they do it today. Probably everything's digital, but the reality is it was nice for me because I was like, oh my God, I forgot about that patient who did well and went away. I forgot about that patient who did really well and went away. And what you start seeing is all these people that you did help who just quietly disappear and go live their lives because they just want to get better and go be with their family. They don't want to keep coming back and telling Jeff and Doug, hey, you guys are the greatest. You fixed my button or you made my ankle feel better. It's really the 5% of those patients that have those chronic struggles that make up about 30% of our bandwidth. And I think that's something that there's just days like today where I just have to step back and say, this is just part of what we do, right? We go to work every day and we listen to people complain. And sometimes you feel like they're complaining at you about you, but really all they're doing is they're just miserable in the fact that they're hurting. They're not at their peak. They're uncertain about what's happening next. They're scared. They're depressed, and that can spill over. And so I got to step back sometimes and remind myself what ends up happening the other 70% of the time. And it's funny because as the universe will happen, I got into my car today and I threw my key into my cup holder, and there was this Outback $100 Outback Steakhouse gift card that one of my patients gave me for replacing his ankle. That's how happy he was. And you can laugh about $100 at Outback, but it meant a lot to me. It was.
You're gonna eat like a king. Let's go.
Yeah. I mean that to him, and I
awesome.
and I don't know people's situation, right? I never judge a book. I've had people come in that you think just walked out from under a bush, and they might have more money than God. And you have other people that drive in a Mercedes and they don't pay their bill. And I learned that in being in private practice for sure. That you never know who you're dealing with. But anytime someone takes the time to go out of their way like that and show appreciation to you, it means a whole heck of a lot more than whatever the monetary value of that gift card is. And that lifted me up today before we got on. So that's kind of was a nice thing that was just sitting there. So I think God sometimes has a plan for us.
That's super nice. I love when patients do that. I had a patient one time knit my name. They took the time and they knitted my name, and they actually knitted one for my wife and my 2 kids as well, and then gave it to me as a gift. And I'm like, I don't even remember what I did. I did my job. I fixed something that they were happy about. But you start to lose track. You're like, how many patients did you see today? What was my income? How much did I make? And like all this stuff. And you start to lose track. Like you said, when people aren't taking it seriously, when they're in the OR, maybe they're joking around. This person is trusting you, putting their life, yes, but more importantly, more targeted their foot or their ankle in your hands to make a difference for them. And you start to lose track of that a little bit. So it's nice when patients go out of their way to show some appreciation. Definitely. How do you handle teaching fellows? Because, I mean, at this point, you've probably seen it all, done it all, but it can be hard to watch people struggle. Struggle might be too harsh of a word, but maybe not nail it as quickly as you know that you can do. How do you handle that when you are in there in the OR and you're trying to teach and you're like, no, not like that? I mean, I think I would just get overly frustrated and be like, here, just give it to me. Let me show you how to do it. Maybe you could try again next time.
I'm sometimes not great at it.
It's hard.
It's funny. And I think the answer to that question is very nuanced in the sense of it really depends on who that fellow is. Okay. So if it's a fellow, I mean, not naming names and not to call anybody out, because I love 90% of my fellows. I mean, I had to fire one, and one I just kind of couldn't wait to get rid of that person. But other than that, I've really enjoyed being able to mentor these people. But I can tell you that when you have that person that comes in and they're giving full effort and they recognize like, hey, your surgeries take longer when you let me do things, right? So I'm going to help you by getting here early and making sure everything's ready and staying late and making sure all the notes are buttoned up and things like that. Because I know that the time that you're spending in the OR that takes your 90-minute surgery and turns it into a 2-hour surgery, that's time you're not spending with your family. Right? There are people that are that conscious, and those people get a lot of extra grace with me. Versus the one that comes in and didn't read and just wants to be given the knife. And I don't see as much with my fellows now because I really do try to screen them ahead of time. I have a phone call with every incoming fellow and I say, if you don't tell me at the end of this year that this isn't the hardest year you've worked in your life, but you're glad you did it, then I didn't do my job. Right? I tell them, I am not here to tell you how great you are. I am not here to reinforce all the good habits you already have. I'm here to fix your bad habits. And here's a simple equation. If you don't think that I have any place doing those things for you, there's the door. You don't belong here, right? Why are you here if you don't think you have anything to learn from me? Because one of the things that I remember in my program was there are guys that I absolutely idolize. I mean, there are guys that are, we call it standing on the shoulders of giants. There are guys that as much as I thought I might have known, as smart as I was, as great as my grades were, as good as I could score on the tests, as much as I could get the answer right in rounds, there was just this thing that you knew you didn't know because you weren't there yet. And those were the guys that were there. and you just wanted to make their lives easy because you were just appreciative to be absorbing their experience, not just from what they tell you and what they show you, but just being around the body language. And so when someone is more uh, ready to present that way, I have a lot more tolerance for it, and I will step back, and I don't, I never lose sight. I work with a residency also, and here's the thing I will tell you. I the residents love, and I love the guy who's like, "Hey, here's the knife. Go ahead." And they're talking to the scrub tech while you're going and you're whittling away on someone as a first year. Um, it is always my responsibility as the surgeon of record, as the person that patient entrusted, to make sure that they get as good of an outcome as if I had done the whole surgery myself.
Yeah.
Now, whether that takes a little longer, because I'm letting one of my residents or fellows do parts of the procedure, or all the procedure, if they show me they can do it, then so be it. But I have zero compunction, Jeff, with taking the knife away from someone who's ill prepared or not getting it done. And I also will pull them aside and say, hey, you need to do these things outside the OR to come back. One of the tricks I tell all of my residents and fellows, and you'd be surprised, maybe you wouldn't, how many people never do it, is I did a lot of off-service rotations in my residency: general surgery, CV surgery, vascular surgery, open vascular surgery. This is before IR did everything. And hand ties were very important, right? Doing hand ties. And so I would put a hand tie on my steering wheel, and I would tie hand ties at every red light I sat at in Washington, D.C., which was a lot of time sitting at red lights. And then when I got good at that, I would then do it with my eyes closed until someone beeped behind me and said, hey, the light's green, what are you doing? And I recommend that to everybody, which is you can always take little things you're doing in life and make your skill set better. Even just doing that tactile sensation is going to make every facet of your surgical skills get better. And so I really like educating people, but at the same time, I never lose sight of the fact that my responsibility is number one to my patient.
Very, very reasonable. You end up tackling a lot of very complicated cases. You don't necessarily have to. I think most people can kind of pick and choose what their niche is and what they like and what they don't like, and ship everything else out. What is it about these complicated cases that draws you to them or makes you want to tackle them?
Oh man, I don't know that I always do. I'll tell you a real, honest to God, from the heart story. I think when I came out of residency, as we all do, right? You went to a great program. Dr. Burns is an amazing mentor, an amazing surgeon, does hard cases. You've seen your share of it. You go out and you say, well, I want to be the guy, right? There's a component of that, and surgeons should want to be the guy. I played baseball a lot of my life, and one of my coaches had a great saying, pressure's the opportunity to do well. If you treat it as a chance to fail, you will. And that means that when the chips are down and there's one swing left, do you want to be at the plate, or do you want to be sitting on the bench cheering for the guy that's at the plate? And I think if you want to be that way, you kind of have to go out with that attitude, like, hey, give me your tough stuff. So when I started my private practice, I didn't have any internal referral sources. I wasn't a hospital employee. I wasn't in a multi-specialty group. I hung a shingle. I went around to all the doctors and I said, hey, I'm this guy. I'm new in town. Here's a skill set that I have that maybe this area doesn't have yet. And it took years, but it built to that. And what ended up happening is I started getting real good referral base from other patients and also primary care doctors and even other surgeons. I also went around to my colleagues and said, hey, if you get into trouble with something, you can send it over to me. I'm happy to take a look at it as a second opinion. No buses in my OR or in my room. I'm not throwing you under any of that.
Mhm.
But with all due respect, if I see something that I think needs correction, don't be offended if I call you up and say, hey, this is the third time you sent this to me. We need to correct the course here. And so over the years, that is kind of how I built my private practice. Which, I didn't really think about it until someone outside me said, it's kind of remarkable how you have this niche practice with all this complexity because you're just this like island, this guy on an island. And before the Affordable Care Act and before all the referring doctors got bought up by the big systems, I got pretty much, once I won a doctor over, I got everything. Well, then what ended up happening is they got bought into these big systems, and then all the bunions and all the easy stuff went to the local guys, but the complex stuff kept coming to me, and you had to call them up and say, hey guys, I like bunions too. But to answer your question sincerely, I kind of stuck myself that way. And now I've had so much experience doing it that I feel an obligation, I guess, when a patient walks through my door, I have one right now. She'd had 9 surgeries by 3 different people before I saw her. And I haven't, and I'm not, this isn't even me telling you a success story because I don't know if I'm going to fix her yet. But one thing she said to me, because I had 3 visits with her, the first time I met her, I said, well, listen, you're too complex. We're going to have you back to figure out what all is going on. Because she had a host of tendon problems, joint problems, deformity problems, and nerve problems from all this surgery. And I had her come back, last patient of the day, spent 2 hours with her, spot injections, just doing diagnostic, therapeutic injections, having her walk on it. By the end of that visit, she told me for the first time in 5 years, I actually don't feel any pain in my leg. And this was a girl who was now 34 and was told she has CRPS, that you're just chronic pain and it's hopeless. Here, get on some pain pills for the rest of your life. And it took time to figure that out. And the question is, why do I do that? I think that's why, because when you get to that moment where you can have someone say that to you with all sincerity, that is something that is so gratifying, so deep, so much bigger than any accolade I could get from a colleague or an organization or anything. And then I said, well, now I think I know what's wrong with you, and I think this is how we fix it. And she said to me at her surgical consult, which was her 3rd visit, you're the first doctor I saw ever that didn't just dismiss my pain, number one. 2, really listened intently and took time to try to parse through all this stuff. And so when you hear things like that, it's hard to give that up. It's not a great moneymaker, I'll admit that. But I think that's what keeps me coming back. It really does. And I don't know if that sounds cliche or not, but that really is what keeps me coming back. And don't get me wrong. I mean, there's people who probably think I stink or I'm bad or whatever. I mean, you know how that goes.
Get in line.
Yeah.
Try starting a podcast and then let people tell you how much you stink.
Yeah. And it's just, that's just part of the game. I mean, I've also learned, I tell my young doctors, like, you don't have to operate on everybody who comes in, right? Make them earn the surgery. Don't be in such a hurry. I've had malignant narcissists catch me off guard. I've had people, and they usually look like the nicest person that you've ever met, as long as you're giving them everything they want. And the moment you say no to them, they'll stab you in the back and cut your throat. So that's a hard lesson learned also. So I think you kind of go through these things, and over time, what I've learned is I think pretty good at helping people in that situation. I think because I have the interest to figure out the root of the problem, and I'm not so worried about that 15-minute office visit. Now I have to worry about that, but in the end, I joke that I'm kind of stuck with it, but I know that I haven't quite given it up yet. So I can't tease myself about it too much and try to be totally serious about it. I don't know if that even answers your question, but it's a confusing topic for my own head.
Yeah, no. And I think it's noble to tackle those things, because I think the easy way out is to not tackle them and brush it off or pass them off to someone else. So hats off to you for tackling those complicated cases. Speaking of complicated cases, why don't we jump into a few here?
Sure.
All right, let's go through these cases here. These are some of your cases, and we'll kind of break them down and maybe take some complicated scenarios and cases and simplify them for some of the people listening. So why don't you take us through this first one here? It says midfoot Charcot approach. Keep in mind, some people are just listening only.
Right. Okay. So this is, when we agreed to do this, you said, well, just, what are some of the things that you're passionate about? And, for all intents and purposes, I do a lot of this lecturing nationally. I teach this, and I have, there's a nice rift now, Jeff, and I'm sure you're aware of it. Anybody who does Charcot, right? And I don't even know what a lot of Charcot is anymore. I put in anywhere from 4 to 5 Alizaroffs a month sometimes, and the flipper foot is the big debate that goes on. Do you just take every Charcot and fuse the hindfoot? And I've kind of come up with an algorithm over the years, because I've done so much of this that I feel like I've weeded out a lot of the landmines, that this is one of those things that people are very interested in. They say, well, why do you still fix midfoot Charcot? And the reason is because it is reproducible and it is predictable if you follow some certain principles, right? And so here we're looking at a 54-year-old, high BMI male, with idiopathic neuropathy. This is not a diabetic, right? But neuropathy originally was was a tertiary syphilis problem. It was something that was described by Jean-Martin Charcot before the advent of penicillin. And what it does is it causes some washing out of the bone density, and you have a midfoot collapse here with some diastasis of the second and third tarsal metatarsal joints, with the cuneiforms kind of sitting up top with sag in the medial column. And when I look at this, I have a whole tenet of things of like the old way that I did it, which was large, treating it like trauma when I first started in residency, and that fell apart. We didn't understand why. Then putting an X-fix on and getting a decent result, but then it fell apart later, not understanding why. Then putting X-fix and internal fixation on, and then getting better successes as you get these bigger, harder plates, these giant hardwares, but then having wound dehiscence problems and latent infection problems. And so as we've evolved, my process has been simple, which is I want to not try to fix everything in one stage. I want to get the Charcot much earlier in its process, because what I've noticed over hundreds of these over the years, the sooner I get the Charcot, the more predictable the salvage is. But you got to go through the steps, which is the first thing we do is we hang this in an external fixer. It's called a butt frame. If you want to go to the next slide, I think we're getting into that area. And what this is just a buttress frame with motors on it. So it's a spatial frame. It's a hexapod frame, and all I got to do is go in and get rid of the deforming force of the Achilles. So I'll lengthen the Achilles. I will take bone biopsies of what Mike pins are called the zone of Charcot out of Loyola, which is up here in Chicago. And I will send all of those for aerobic, anaerobic, acid, fast, and fungal. And that will then help me determine if there's a subacute osteomyelitis, which, depending on the season, depending on the data I track, sometimes it's as low as 10%, sometimes it's as high as 30%. I will say with the advent of Dexcom, I think we're seeing less of that, but you never know who's going to have this sort of bacteria that's just sitting in the bone, not making the patient sick, but not allowing the bone to be healthy. And I want to know that before I put any infix in. And so what I've done is that's kind of the infection piece is what started this. Then I started having these patients crank out these deformities with the external fixator, which is minimally invasive. And I thought, why am I doing 4.5, 5 hour cases to take all this apart and try to put it back together, big wedges? I'm going to send this home with the patient and let them do the work minimally invasively and slowly, so that we can gradually correct this, which also elicits the Lizaroff tension stress principle, which in my mind, and I don't have proof for this yet, but I will say it at the outset, I do believe that this pulls the bone out of Charcot, the osteoclastic activity versus the osteoblastic activity, because I do get samples of that from my pathologist when I take my bone biopsies and my cultures. Once I do that, the first time I did this, I took everything off and I did beaming and I put everything together. And the first thing I thought, Jeff, was not some epiphany like how brilliant I am, but I was like, wow, that was easy. Like I didn't have to fight with all this deformity. The case went together amazingly quickly, amazingly smoothly. I didn't have to fight to force the beam to not go medial to the talus. And I thought that's really onto something. Then I started giving frame holidays. And ever since I started doing that, I stopped getting latent infections with these patients. The things I call like the 6-month later patient that ends up in the ER when you're out to dinner with your wife and they say, hey, this patient's foot is blowing up with pus from the inside out. And you go, well, where the hell did that come from? Yeah. And so that has ceased a lot. So the next slide, if you go to it, this is sort of just the construct where we use stirrup wires to pull on the zone Charcot with the X-fix. And then for sake of time, if you go to the next slide, this is just sort of another view of that where you can see how the frame is lined up so we can actually tell the computer this is what the deformity has, and then we want you to turn these knobs a certain way to kind of put this back to rectus. Then you go in and you do your internal fixation, which I am also very big on not using large plates. I use smaller incisions now. I always use the subtalar joint. I always use the TN joint. I always use a cross-locking beam in the medial column. I don't put anything in the lateral column anymore. I've done all of those things. I have found that if I get a good solid double medial column fusion with a subtalar fusion, that floats the lateral column just fine. I have no problem with putting some plate augmentation on a softer bone or a bigger person. That bone is not the same as normal bone, so you're not going to stress shield the beam any more than you would in like a regular trauma. And as we know, Dr. Siddiqui, Noman Siddiqui showed that one of the secret sauces to Charcot is you got to give it a year for the bone to heal. You just got to be patient with it. And you have to tell the patient that at the outset. So this is sort of what we do. If you go to the next slide, I think I have a before and after here. That's the after. Okay, this is a year later of transitioning the patient into a UCBL orthosis. I've had very few non-unions and delayed unions with my Charcots that get to me at a reasonable stage that are not already infected since I started employing this. I am working up a publication on this. I want to make sure I get a lot of robust data on it and some good follow-up. But this is something to think about as we approach Charcot. And we say, well, medial column never works. It always kills the talus. It always collapses. It never heals. And I call challenge to that. So my point is, why kill the ankle joint? Here, if you go to the next slide, I think I have another example of this. Here's a 35-year-old male with type 2 diabetes, right? And as you know, our diabetic patients aren't all 40s, 50s, 60s anymore. They're getting younger and younger and younger. Mm-hmm. And I actually put this slide up, not to call anybody out, but there was a recent post, on LinkedIn, and I do a lot of that too. In some of these cases, I've already posted on LinkedIn. I just collated them because I have them in a convenient PowerPoint fashion. But this is one where this midfoot is dislocated, it's split like and it's the the navicular is split. If you look at the AP, you can see that the forefoot's sitting on top of the talar neck. And a lot of people would just go and do a TTC fusion on this, right? But if you kind of slip through the slides again, just hit again, we go through the same process where we're going to go ahead and we're going to take that Alizaroff, we're going to let it do its work. This patient had a much hotter form of Charcot, so we did convert this one to a weight-bearing frame to let him sit in the frame a little bit longer. If you go to the next slide, here's our frame came off. We went ahead and we did the internal fixation. This one had such splaying of the midfoot. I did do some lateral column work on this. So every one of these is different, but the principle of the algorithm is the same. Give me a good subtalar joint fusion, give me a good medial column fusion, and this can be predictable. And if you look, the ankle's fine. If you go to the next, that's the recon surgery on 222. And then 5/3/22, you have a before and after. And you just don't have to destroy all these ankles. So I'm a big proponent of doing midfoot. I don't have a problem with people who do flipper foot if they have a patient population that makes this difficult, or if they're particularly sicker people. I do get pretty tight with my patients' glucose control and things like this. So I understand that there are situations where you would just dump this into a TTC fusion. But the idea that midfoot Charcot doesn't work is a myth. If you follow the principles and eradicate some of the landmines before you step on them.
So I want to go back for a second to the hexapod. When you see these patients acutely, what is you're just reducing it and stabilizing it into? Are you making osteotomies? Are you doing like ligament releases, TALs? What are you actually doing when you put this hexapod on?
First stage, pretty religiously TAL, bone biopsies and cultures of zona Charcot, then putting the frame on. If it's an ankle, we do this ankle Charcot too. If it's an ankle Charcot, they'll get an ankle hexapod / talar spatial frame. If they're a midfoot, they'll get a buttress hexapod / spatial frame. Osteotomies are if there's like coalesced deformity and I want to break it apart to kind of reduce deformity. Like I said, now where I've gotten in my practice, people know to kind of send it to me sooner. And so when I get those, I'm doing less of those osteotomies. And what I'm doing is I'm just basically, I tell people, we're minimally invasively hooking up all the deformity, and then I'm letting the motors of the spatial frame and the hexapod distract out the deformity. And so this turns what used to be a 4 or 5 hour surgery. And I tell surgeons who will listen, this actually makes this a tenable problem too, from just a practice standpoint in terms of your time value, which is I can do this in about 65 minutes first stage on a simple midfoot. The frame coming off for the 2-week holiday is a 15-minute procedure. And then because everything's lined up, whatever it takes you to prep, with the MISers nowadays too, prep the TN joint, prep the subtalar joint, make an incision over the first metatarsophalangeal joint, slide a beam in, lock it, slide a subtalar joint, beam or screws in, lock it. It makes this a much more tenable surgery. It's better for the patient. It's better for you. It gives much more predictable results and it's just a much easier lift. And so to that end, all of the above, to answer your question, just depends on the situation. Because as you know, not all Charcots look the same.
Right. Are you supplementing them with anything from a biological standpoint, or like we get into the deep dark niches of Charcot and osteoclasts and osteoprotegrin and all the stuff that comes along with that pathway? Are you a believer in any of the bone supplement osteoporosis medications or no?
I'm a believer in good albumin. I'm a believer in good vitamin D, right? Supplementing vitamin D. I'm a big believer in A1C, right? And glucose control. A lot of this is, even like cancers, immune system failure. right? The osteoclast, osteoblast imbalance. I've always said, maybe one of these days when you look at all these Charcots, they have these rank proteins that are just, making the osteoclast overwhelm the osteoblast. Maybe in the long run, the answer to Charcot is a pharmacologic. Who knows? But yeah, I mean, I will put BMP, I will put DBM, I will put bone graft, I will put all kinds of things in there to try to supplement. It's a kitchen sink approach because you get one shot to do that.
Yeah.
And you want to reduce the complications. And what people say to me, just to kind of preempt questions that I get all the time, is, well, this is 3 trips to the operating room. I say, well, one's taking a frame off, which doesn't really count. I do curette the bone out, so those patients don't want to be awake for that. But at the same time, when you look at the trauma data on our diabetics, more than half of them get an unplanned return to the OR anyway in an uncontrolled situation. So I'm willing to make that trade-off. I'm willing to take that patient to the operating room an extra time so that I'm controlling the ball game instead of going to that operating room, on a day when this is totally unsuspected and a surprise. I feel over the course of the last 10 years that I've been doing this, it's been an absolute viable trade-off.
Well, it's also limb salvage too. When these patients are coming in, there's going to be some sacrifices that are made from, expense of frames and multiple surgeries and all that stuff. But at what expense, and it's limb salvage. And that's the prize at the end of the yellow brick road is the limb salvage. So you have to, some people will push back on things like that, but there's limb salvage. And I ask people, what would you want if it was your leg? Would you want everything to be done to save this? And then someone might say, well, they put themselves in this situation with poor diabetic control and all that stuff. But that's not your wrong to right. I think all you could do is just do the best you can for this patient and put their foot into the best position possible and set them up for as much success as possible. So this looks fantastic.
Yeah, and from a cost perspective, I know you have Mike Theodulo on, and he has a very great command of the subject matter there, and he'll tell you that there's mounds of literature to support salvage over amputation in terms of cost, long-term cost of the system.
Yeah.
And the other thing I ask people when I'm in a debate with one of my faculty at any of the meetings is I say to the crowd, if you're given midfoot Charcot, and you have, Dr. A over here telling you we're just gonna let that fly and we're gonna fuse your ankle, or you're given, choice B, where we can actually try to salvage the midfoot with reasonable reliability and predictability while not touching the innocent ankle. Which would you choose? As a patient, which would you choose? And what that requires when you kind of go through this staged approach to it. When I have patients who have bacteria that we can't get out, or the bone is just so destroyed that it's not worth salvaging, then I can go to that patient and say, hey, I think you're better off with a midfoot amputation or XYZ. Like sometimes you get to the amputation at a better level, a more distal level, because you didn't drive that infection that you can't get out deeper into the limb. And I have had cases like that. I've had cases where because of this process, I've discovered subacute osteomyelitis that is a pan-resistant bacteria. The patient has, end-stage renal disease or their chronic kidney disease, and you don't want to put them on dialysis for the rest of their life. And you're given the option between a Charcot or a transmetatarsal amputation or 3 days a week in the dialysis unit. I mean, that's an easy choice for me.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of infection, because a lot of times infection comes along with these complicated reconstructions, diabetics, what have you. Are you a oral antibiotic person? Are you a PICC line person? Do you consult ID and let them decide what to do? Where are you at with your infection management these days?
I consult ID always, or well, I mean, when it's something that I'm like, hey, this is more than just a minor infection, right? Especially if it's in the bone, that patient is going to go to ID. ID is going to weigh in on it. Not because I don't know that Bactrim's just as good as IV antibiotics, but for bone penetration, but because I don't know what's new, right? And the thing is, these guys are up to date, like we're up to date with all the latest and greatest things we do in our surgical techniques, and I'm not going to presume to be able to keep up with all that because we all have enough problems keeping up with the mountains of information we need to keep up with to keep our specialty sharp. So I always do the consult. I am kind of indifferent. I always tell the patient the infectious disease doctor is going to tell you whether you're going to be on a PICC line, whether you're going to be on orals, how long you're going to be on it, and they're going to tell me when I'm allowed to put hardware in here. And I found that has been also something that has helped my efforts particularly by making sure the patient knows we're not in a hurry to get you this last x-ray where you have hardware in your foot, because then we're done. That we're going to take our time so that when you get to that point, your chance of keeping it past 6 months goes up exponentially.
I think that's a good way to look at it. All right, what are we talking about here?
Peter DeBall bone transport. So this is another thing that I started doing. I presented this at a dinner meeting at ACFAS last February, or a case like this. And I had several people come up to me and say, "Hey, we've never heard of that or seen that before." I have put cases like this on LinkedIn. I've had people reach out to me and say, "Hey, what are you actually doing on this?" So when you asked me to come on, I said, "Well, why don't I put this on this way?" So we'll burn through this one real quick, because this is the last time in 2021 that I ever put a cage between the tibia and the calc, and I'm going to show you why. You absolutely can do this, right? And Sam Adams has published a bunch of papers out of Duke. I know him personally. We had a conversation about it. When you do this, particularly in diabetic patients, you're going to have kind of a 30 to 40% accepted failure rate versus 0% in the femoral head world. So that is an improvement at that time. But I started thinking to myself, can we do this in a better way? And if I'll show you the mode of failure of this case, I'll explain to you how I came up with the idea, which is this patient had come in, she had a femoral head, it had gotten infected. Everything came out. What we're looking at right now is we're looking at an antibiotic cement rod in the TTC space with beads in what would have been the talus. You're looking, and this is on May of 2021. If you go to the next slide, in June of 2021, after we had her in an X-Fix and kind of treated the infection, we had a custom-made cage printed up for her. And you can see here, we basically, for those who are just listening, we have a cage that is articulating with the distal tibia, and it's conical in its contact with the calcaneus. I use a number 36 or 38 acetabular reamer, and then I can put the heel wherever I want, and then slide the rod up through that. And then this one also has an articulation with the navicular. And I think, Jeff, you can criticize it, but I think it's put together pretty well here. Mm-hmm. And so I'm pretty happy with how this looks. Right. And I sent her home, and then she comes back in, and you can see what you see here is you start to see that the tib implant interface is pretty solid, but the navicular and the calcaneus are starting to cut out. And this is because she was actually non-weight bearing, but she was scooching, which means she was using her operative foot to pull herself along in her wheelchair. And to her, that was not putting weight on it. Yeah. And so she kind of knocked this thing loose. And I said, well, how can I salvage this without redoing this operation? So we go to the next slide. We just went ahead and I said, why don't we just put an external fixator on this and compress it down and see if we can't drive fusion? And so we did that in August of 2021. And here's a picture just showing an external fixator around this construct, where now I'm pushing the calc and the navicular into the inferior aspect of this cage, trying to ask the bone to unite with it. And you go to the next one. And then this is what we got. This is November of 2021. And we took the X-Fix off, and she has a reasonably stable implant. And when you're for people who aren't viewing, you take your hands and you grip the ankle and you kind of try to move it. You try to dorsiflex and evert and invert. And what you're looking for is rigidity in that calcaneus. And she did pretty well with this. And so I'm like, okay, this process works. Remember, this is now 5 years ago. If you go to the next slide. But here we are in November of the following year. So she got about a good year out of it. So, but then what happened is she started cutting out. And I started to ask myself, and I'm a big materials guy, so modulus of elasticity of a titanium cage against trabecular bone in the calcaneus, right? Particularly when the subchondral plate is gone in the subtalar joint, and this just cuts out. So I thought to myself, there's got to be a better way. So if you move on to the next slide. This is a case where this is a patient who came in who had 3 prior surgeries, history of club foot. She's Italian. She called it the Sicilian foot, which I'm Italian. I don't really know what that means, except that maybe that's club foot with a shortened leg, maybe some form of a subset of polio or something like that. And so she undergoes 2 attempts at a TTC fusion. She gets the ankle fusion good, but now she's got a second time failed and eroding subtalar joint. So in my classic form, what's the first thing I do? I take everything out. I bone biopsy and I culture the non-union site. And I tell her, what we're going to do here? Instead of putting a cage in between your talus and your calcaneus, or your tibia and your calcaneus, she was 1.5 inches short on that side. So she lost a lot of height, not only by her deformity from birth, but also by all these surgeries. And I just said, I'm going to do a bone transport on you. And I thought to myself, where's the best bone in the body for asking a non-union site to heal? And that's going to be masculine regenerate. So I put the frame on, we do the tibial osteotomy. If you go to the next slide, we put PMMA cement in the non-union site to stimulate blood flow to that area. Here's just a clinical picture of the frame. It's one of the few times I use half pins in my external fixator constructs. You go to the next slide. Here you are. We basically distracted 1 millimeter a day over the course of 35 days or so. We got about 15 millimeters at the subtalar joint and 30 millimeters at the tibia.
See this here? That's
Here's
the regenerate bone from the distraction osteogenesis. All this would calcify if we held it and compressed it. We're going to take this and we're going to steal this to dump it into the non-union site. So we got her length back. We're going to put the cage in, but we're going to steal all of this and dump it in her non-union site, so she has a lot of good healing tissue. Awesome.
What I love about that video and this picture is if you go back to the previous,
see this here? That's the regenerate bone.
One more. That gap that you see in the bone, that go back to this picture. You can skip 2 ahead because it'll show the. This is what you're looking at, right? It's just not calcified yet. So it's this nice mush and amalgam of mesenchymal stem cells and osteoblasts and all these healing tissues. This gets crunched up. This becomes my bone graft. I take rhea and I put that around the cage. If you go to the next slide. And what we do is we dump the cage inside the tibia. We block our compressive nail with a plate, and then we put the regenerate in the subtalar joint. And then if you go to the next slide, you can see here that this is healed. Now you'll notice that I also had to do a Cole because she had a cavus foot and she had some TN pain. And I said, well, where the non-union site, the hindfoot nail for a year. And if you still have problems, I'll address the midfoot then, because I wanted to make sure we were doing something good for her. She did come back in a year and say, my ankle feels great. My calcaneus feels great. None of that hurts anymore, but I am feeling a lot of the arthritis in the TN. So we went ahead and did a Cole on her, and that took care of that problem. And I think if you go to one more slide, I don't know if I put that one in. Okay, I didn't. If you go back, if you look at the right-hand slide, and for the audience, what you'll see in the posterior aspect of the talus, you'll see this creep of enchondral bone healing around the cage. And you get that because you have this periosteal coverage of this implant. Whereas when you put the implant between the talus and the calcaneus, you got to get a much wider creep of bone. So it's a much easier lift biologically for the body to heal around this cage inside the tibial osteotomy than it is when you're putting it between 2 bones that were never meant to be together. You can open up that envelope of masculae, you can put the cage in, you can close it back over, and all you need is for that to really calcify around. And I'm batting 1,000 with this. I'm going to publish it eventually when I get some further out data and a little more robust data. But so far it's been kind of a game changer for these limb length problems and some of these bad deformities where you're having people come in and say, I'm looking at an amputation. What I was sent to you because I was told that I need to have an amputation and I'm strongly considering it.
I think that's fantastic, and that makes a whole lot of sense because those cages, it seems like the further distal they get, the more likely they are to fail. Ankle, okay, fine. When you get down into the calcaneus, I mean, that is just fraught with so many complications down there. Calcaneus is one of those bones that we're not quite good at salvaging, and if you cut out a big chunk of it or start to lose pieces of it, can't go backwards. Can't start, maybe someday they'll make a metal calcaneus that you could reattach
It's been made. I mean, my relationship with Restore 3D and the custom printed stuff. I mean, I know of people having made them. I'm not aware of any large series that say it's really viable at this point. And I think you're right that the calcaneus is a particularly problematic bone when we start losing real estate in that area. And that's exactly right. It's the modulus of the calcaneus against the metal that I have postulated that's why even when you get a successful fusion, protected fusion, when that patient really goes out and stops using their AFO or stops using their crow walker, stop doing, the things that they want to look normal, and then they start cutting out later. I've had enough successes with cages in the tib calc, but too many failures. And that's why I started rethinking how we do that.
Yeah. I think those are fascinating cases, and I think younger people hearing that, their minds are going to be blown because they won't understand what's going on. But anyone who tries to tackle that stuff, I think that's going to be very helpful for them to hear those techniques and hear the thought processes, more importantly, behind them. And And it's always helpful when you hear people tell you, hey, here's what I used to do, and here's why I don't do that anymore. Because why not learn from other people's mistakes? You mentioned earlier, stand on the shoulders of giants and learn from the people. So I really appreciate you taking time to share those cases with us. Those are extremely complicated things that are fraught with high failure rates, not because of anything we do, or maybe sometimes things we do, but they're just such a complicated patient platform that we're working with that it's difficult. So thank you for sharing those cases, and thank you for joining me on this episode tonight.
Jeff, it's been an absolute honor and a pleasure. I really want to tell you, I appreciate what you're doing here. I've been following this from afar, and you got some great people on here, and you got some great talks and some great interviews. So keep it up. I think this is really cool.
Thank you. Appreciate you. And thank you, everyone, for listening to this episode of Paw Patrol with your host, Dr. Jeff Dykes, joined by Doug Pacaccio. We will see you guys next time.
Have a good day.
Disclaimer. Opinions expressed are those of the content creators and do not represent any employer or entity. The information shared is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as medical advice or used in any legal capacity, including establishing standards of care. All efforts have been made to comply with HIPAA regulations. No guarantees are made regarding the accuracy of statements or opinions provided. Interaction with the podcast does not establish a doctor-patient relationship. Please enjoy this podcast responsibly.